The surveillance footage didn't lie, but Fiona Bennett still couldn't believe what she was watching through the monitor in the downtown community center's cramped office. The notorious Marcus Ivory, the bad boy millionaire who'd made headlines for shutting down 3 family-owned businesses in the past year alone, was sitting cross-legged on the gymnasium floor reading picture books to a circle of wide-eyed children. His leather jacket was draped over a folding chair, his tattooed forearms gesturing animatedly as he voiced different characters, making the kids erupt in giggles. "He's been showing up every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 weeks now," said Claire, the center's director, appearing beside Fiona with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Court-ordered community service. Judge Martinez gave him 200 hours after that public altercation outside the Meridian last month." Fiona accepted the coffee, her eyes still fixed on the screen. She'd seen Marcus Ivory's face plastered across business magazines and gossip columns for the past 2 years. At 32, he'd built a commercial real estate empire by buying up properties in gentrifying neighborhoods, evicting long-term tenants, and flipping buildings for massive profits. The press loved painting him as the villain of modern capitalism, and from everything Fiona had read, they weren't wrong. The altercation Claire mentioned had involved Marcus throwing a drink at a reporter who'd ambushed him with questions about a family he'd displaced. "He doesn't look very happy about it," Fiona observed, though that wasn't entirely true. Something in his expression seemed almost peaceful as a little girl with braids climbed into his lap to see the pictures better. He wasn't at first. The first day, he sat in the corner on his phone the entire time, barely acknowledging anyone. But then little Maya asked him to tie her shoe and something shifted. Claire smiled. "Now look at him." Fiona had returned to her hometown of Portland 6 months ago after her public relations firm in New York had dissolved in spectacular fashion. She'd taken a job at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized PR company that specialized in reputation management. Her boss, Gerald Morrison, had been hinting for weeks about a major new client, someone who needed serious image rehabilitation. When he'd called her into his office that morning and said the name Marcus Ivory, Fiona had nearly walked out. "I know his reputation," Gerald had said, leaning back in his leather chair. "But his lawyer reached out personally. Marcus wants to change. Not just look like he's changing for the cameras, but actually change. He needs someone who'll be honest with him, push back when necessary." "I think you're perfect for this." "Why would I want to help someone who's made millions destroying communities?" Fiona had asked. "Because maybe you can help him stop, and maybe in the process he'll rebuild what he's torn down. Isn't that worth trying?" Now, watching Marcus on the security monitor as he high-fived a boy who'd correctly identified all the animals in the book, Fiona wondered if Gerald might be right. There was something in the way Marcus interacted with these kids, unguarded and genuine, that didn't match the cold-eyed businessman from the magazine covers. "I need to observe him more before I make my decision," Fiona said to Claire. "Would it be all right if I volunteered here for a while? I want to see what he's really like when he doesn't think anyone important is watching." Claire's eyes lit up. "We always need volunteers. Can you start tomorrow?" The next evening, Fiona arrived at the community center wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She dressed down deliberately, wanting to blend in with the other volunteers. Claire introduced her to the team as a new helper and assigned her to the homework assistance program, which operated in the same large room where the reading circle took place. Marcus arrived at 5:30, right on schedule. Up close, he was taller than she'd expected, probably 6'2", with dark hair that fell just past his ears and green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The tattoos on his arms were intricate, expensive work, scenes of Portland's cityscape mixed with geometric patterns. He wore dark jeans and a black t-shirt that looked deceptively simple, but probably cost more than Fiona's entire outfit. He barely glanced at her as he moved to his usual spot, where children were already gathering with books clutched in their small hands. Fiona settled at a table nearby with 3 elementary schoolers who needed help with math homework, but she kept one ear tuned to Marcus's reading session. His voice was deep and surprisingly warm as he read, nothing like the clipped, aggressive tone she'd heard in interview clips online. When a boy interrupted to ask why the caterpillar in the story was so hungry, Marcus didn't brush off the question. He engaged, asking the boy what made him hungry, talking about growing and changing, somehow turning a simple question into a meaningful conversation. "Miss Fiona, you're not paying attention," said Emma, one of the girls at her table, poking the worksheet between them. "You're right. I'm sorry," Fiona said, refocusing on the multiplication problems in front of her. An hour later, as parents began arriving to pick up their children, Marcus stood and stretched. A little boy hugged his leg before running off, and Marcus's face softened in a way that made Fiona's predetermined judgments wobble slightly. "You're new," Marcus said, and Fiona realized he was looking directly at her. "Started today," she replied, keeping her voice casual. "Fiona Bennett." Marcus. He didn't offer his last name, and she didn't acknowledge that she already knew it. "You're good with the kids. Emma's usually bouncing off the walls by now, but she actually focused." "She just needed someone to pay attention," Fiona said, feeling slightly guilty since she hadn't been paying full attention earlier. Marcus grabbed his jacket from the chair and shrugged it on. "That's what most people need." The comment struck her as oddly vulnerable for someone with his reputation. Before she could respond, he was heading toward the door, stopping only to fist bump a teenager who called out his name. Over the next 2 weeks, Fiona maintained her cover as a regular volunteer while carefully observing Marcus. She watched him break up arguments between kids with surprising patience, explaining concepts like fairness and respect without talking down to them. She noticed how he always remembered details from previous conversations, asking one girl about her sick cat and congratulating a boy on his soccer game. But she also saw moments when his phone would ring and his entire demeanor would shift. He'd step into the hallway, and even through the closed door, she could hear his voice turn hard and sharp. Business Marcus, she thought, the one who'd earned his reputation. "Why do you do this?" Fiona asked him one evening after most of the kids had left. They were putting away books together, an accidental pairing that had become routine. Marcus didn't look up from the shelf he was organizing. "Court order, remember? Claire told me about that the first day, but you're doing more than the minimum now. You could sit in a corner and count down your hours. Instead, you're actually engaging." He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "My mom used to take me to a place like this when I was a kid, after my dad left. We were broke, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Southeast Portland. The community center had free meals, homework help, a safe place to exist. I spent every afternoon there for 3 years. Fiona hadn't expected such honesty. Every article she'd read had mentioned Marcus's self-made status, but none had included details about his childhood. "What changed?" "My mom worked 3 jobs and saved enough to start a small catering business. It took off. By the time I was in high school, we were comfortable. By the time I was in college, we were wealthy." He finally turned to look at her, and something in his expression was carefully neutral. And then I graduated, got into real estate, and became exactly the kind of person who would have kicked my mom and me out of our apartment back then. The self-awareness surprised her. So why did you become that person? Because I was good at it. Because the money was incredible. Because I told myself it was just business, nothing personal. He shoved a book onto the shelf harder than necessary. Turns out when you treat people like obstacles instead of human beings, eventually you become the obstacle to your own humanity. Is that why you're really here? Not just the court order. Marcus leaned against the bookshelf, crossing his arms. The court order forced me to show up. These kids are why I keep showing up. They remind me of who I used to be before I forgot that every building I buy, every property I flip, is someone's home, someone's life. Fiona felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the armor of judgment she'd built around this man. Are you planning to change how you do business? I don't know yet, he admitted. I've got investors, contracts, a whole empire built on a model that works. Changing it isn't simple, but necessary if you mean what you're saying. His eyes met hers, sharp and assessing. You ask a lot of questions for a volunteer. I'm curious about people, she said, which was true enough. Especially people who seem like contradictions. Is that what I am, aren't you? A smile almost reached his lips. Maybe, or maybe I'm just figuring out which version of myself is real. That night, Fiona sat in her apartment staring at her laptop, Marcus's words echoing in her mind. She'd come to the community center expecting to confirm her assumptions about him, to gather evidence of his irredeemable nature, so she could tell Gerald this was a hopeless case. Instead, she'd found someone more complex than the headlines suggested, someone who seemed genuinely troubled by his own actions. She opened her email and typed a message to Gerald. I'll take Marcus Ivory as a client, but only if he agrees to some conditions. I need to meet with him first, establish ground rules, and make sure he's serious about change. Gerald's response came within minutes. Meeting scheduled for tomorrow, 10 a.m. my office. He'll be there. When Fiona walked into Gerald's office the next morning, Marcus was already seated in one of the leather chairs facing the desk. He wore a charcoal suit today, perfectly tailored, and looked every inch the millionaire businessman. But when he saw her, confusion crossed his face before settling into something like understanding. Fiona Bennett, he said slowly. Let me guess, not just a volunteer. I am a volunteer, she said, taking the seat beside him. I'm also a public relations specialist, and Gerald asked me to observe you before deciding whether to take you on as a client. So you've been spying on me. I've been watching you interact with the community you're supposedly serving as part of your court order. There's a difference. Marcus looked at Gerald. Did you know she was doing this? It was my idea, Gerald said unapologetically. You need someone who won't just take your money and feed you platitudes, Marcus. You need someone who'll tell you the truth and push you to actually change, not just appear to change. Fiona's one of the best I've got, but she doesn't work with clients she doesn't believe in. So I gave her a chance to see if you're worth believing in. And what's the verdict? Marcus asked, turning back to Fiona. She met his gaze steadily. I think you're at a crossroads, and I think part of you genuinely wants to take the better path. But I also think you're still holding onto the justifications for your past behavior, and until you fully let go of those, any change will be superficial. Pretty harsh assessment. You asked for honesty, that's what you're getting. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. All right, say I hire you and say I'm serious about this. What would that actually look like? Fiona pulled out a folder she'd prepared the night before. First, full transparency. I need access to your current business dealings, your contracts, your plans. I can't help you if I don't understand what we're working with. Second, You start making concrete changes, not just optics improvements. That means reviewing your business model, finding ways to invest in communities instead of displacing them. Third, you continue your volunteer work even after your court hours are complete, and we build a genuine track record of community engagement. That's a lot more than image management. Image management is about making you look good. I'm talking about actually being good. There's a difference. And if I can't afford to change my business model that drastically, I've got investors who expect returns, employees who depend on those returns, contracts that can't just be broken. Then we find creative solutions, Fiona said. There are models for ethical real estate development. Yes, you'll make less profit. Yes, it'll be harder. But if you're serious about this, if you really want to be someone different than who you've been, then you'll figure it out. Gerald interjected, Fiona's right, Marcus. You came to me because you wanted real change. This is what real change requires. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the armrest. Finally, he said, all right, but I have a condition of my own. What's that? Fiona asked. You don't just observe from a distance or manage my image from behind a desk. You're with me, in the meetings, in the decisions, seeing exactly how complicated this is. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. The way he said together made something flutter in Fiona's stomach, which she immediately pushed down. This was professional. He was a client, nothing more. Agreed. They shook hands and Fiona tried to ignore how warm his palm was, how his grip was firm but not aggressive. Over the following weeks, Fiona was pulled into Marcus's world in ways she hadn't anticipated. She sat in on meetings with his investors, watched him navigate conference calls with contractors, reviewed financial statements until her eyes crossed. The complexity of his business empire was staggering. He owned 43 properties across Portland, employed nearly 100 people, and had partnerships with developers in 3 other cities. But she also saw how his business operated, and it confirmed her worst fears. Marcus's company would identify neighborhoods on the cusp of gentrification, buy buildings with long-term tenants, and offer those tenants minimal buyouts or simply wait for leases to expire before renovating and tripling the rent. The profit margins were enormous, but the human cost was devastating. This has to stop, Fiona said after one particularly brutal meeting where Marcus's acquisitions team proposed buying a building that housed a community grocery store and 3 family apartments. They were in Marcus's office, a sleek space on the 20th floor of a downtown high-rise with panoramic views of the city. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, looking exhausted. If I say no to this deal, Johnson Properties will swoop in and buy it instead. At least with us, we could offer better buyouts than they would. That's not good enough, and you know it. You're still displacing people from their homes. So what's the alternative? I walk away from every deal, tank my company, put 100 people out of work. No, you pivot. You start developing in ways that preserve communities instead of destroying them. There's a model for this, Marcus. Affordable housing development, mixed-income properties, partnerships with the city for inclusive projects. Yes, the profit margins are smaller, but they're still profits. My investors will revolt. Then get new investors or buy them out. You're a millionaire, Marcus. You have options that most people don't. He looked at her with something between frustration and admiration. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, it's hard. But that doesn't make it less necessary. They argued like this almost daily, Fiona pushing him to make harder choices, Marcus pushing back with the reality of contracts and obligations and financial commitments. But slowly, incrementally, things began to shift. Marcus started researching affordable housing models. He reached out to nonprofits working in community development. He even attended a city council meeting on equitable development, sitting in the back row and actually listening. At the community center, their dynamic had changed too. The other volunteers now knew Fiona was working with Marcus professionally, and while some were skeptical, most seemed cautiously supportive. "He's different than he was a month ago," Claire told Fiona one evening. "More present. Like he's actually thinking about what he's doing here instead of just going through the motions." Fiona had noticed it too. Marcus engaged more deeply with the kids, asked more questions, stayed later to help clean up. He'd even donated new books to the center's library, though he'd done it anonymously, until Emma had loudly thanked Mr. Marcus for the pretty new stories. One Tuesday evening, as they were arranging chairs for the next day's after-school program, Marcus said, "I made a decision about the Belmont Street property." Fiona looked up from the chair she was unfolding, the one with the grocery store. "Yeah, I'm pulling out of that deal. Seriously." "Don't sound so shocked. You've been on my case about it for 2 weeks." But he was almost smiling. "I talked to the current owner. He's willing to sell, but only because he can't afford the building maintenance anymore. So instead of buying and flipping, I'm going to buy and invest. Keep the existing tenants, renovate without displacing anyone, help the grocery store owner upgrade his facilities. My profit margin will be minimal, maybe even a loss for the first few years, but it's the right thing to do." Fiona felt warmth spread through her chest. "Marcus, that's amazing." "It's one property, don't get too excited. It's a start. It's proof that you can do this differently." He set down the chair he was holding and turned to face her fully. "I couldn't have done it without you pushing me. You know that, right? You're the one making the choices. I'm just asking the hard questions. You're doing a lot more than that." His voice had gone softer, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with something Fiona had been trying to ignore for weeks. "You're making me want to be better. Not for the cameras or the press. For myself. And maybe a little bit for you." Fiona's breath caught. "Marcus, we're working together." "We can't, I know," he said quickly. "I know the timing is terrible and the professional boundaries and all of that. I'm not asking you for anything, I just needed you to know." The honesty in his voice made her chest ache. Because the truth was, she'd been feeling it too. Somewhere between the arguments in his office and the quiet moments shelving books at the community center, she'd started seeing Marcus not as a project or a client, but as a person. A complicated, flawed, but genuinely trying person who made her laugh with his dry observations and impressed her with his growing willingness to change. "The timing is terrible," she agreed quietly, "and the professional boundaries are real. But," he asked, and there was hope in his eyes that made her want to both run toward him and run away. "But maybe when this project is over, when we've successfully transformed your business and your image, and we're no longer working together." She trailed off, leaving the possibility hanging between them. Marcus smiled, and it was the first completely unguarded smile she'd seen from him. "I can work with maybe." They kept working, but something had shifted. There was an awareness now, a careful dance of professional distance layered over growing personal feeling. Fiona caught Marcus watching her during meetings with an expression that made her skin warm. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, remembering the way he'd gently redirected a child's tantrum, or the passion in his voice when he'd explained a new community investment idea. 2 months into their working relationship, Marcus made his biggest move yet. He called a meeting with his primary investors and proposed a fundamental restructuring of his company's mission. Instead of pure profit-driven development, he wanted to focus on community-centered projects with sustainable returns. He acknowledged it would mean lower profits, but argued for the long-term benefits of building goodwill and avoiding the kind of public relations disasters that had led to his court-ordered community service in the first place. Fiona sat in on the meeting, her heart pounding as she watched Marcus present. He was confident but not arrogant, passionate but grounded in financial reality. He'd prepared meticulously, with projections and case studies and examples of successful community-centered developments in other cities. The investors were skeptical, asking pointed questions about returns and market positioning. But Marcus held his ground, and by the end of the 3-hour meeting, he'd convinced 5 of his 7 major investors to support the new direction. The other 2 agreed to discuss it further rather than pulling out immediately. After everyone had filed out, Fiona and Marcus stood alone in the conference room. "You did it," she said, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "We did it," he corrected. "None of this would exist without you. I didn't present. I didn't convince them. That was all you." Marcus moved closer, and she could smell his cologne, something woodsy and understated. "Fiona, you've been convincing me for months that this was possible, that I could be someone different. Today was just me passing that conviction along." "What happens now?" she asked, though she wasn't entirely sure if she was talking about his business or about them. "Now we start implementing. I've got a list of properties where we can start making changes. The Belmont project is moving forward. I'm in talks with 2 nonprofits about partnerships. It's going to be messy and complicated and probably take years to fully transition. But you're committed." "I'm committed." He paused, his green eyes searching her face. "To the business changes and to figuring out what happens with us once the professional boundaries aren't in the way anymore." The "us" made her breath catch. "Marcus, I know not yet. I'm patient." He smiled slightly. "Well, I'm learning to be patient." The transformation of Marcus's business wasn't instant or easy. There were setbacks and complications. One of the investors who'd been on the fence ultimately pulled out, forcing Marcus to buy back his shares at a premium. A planned development fell through when the city denied permits. Marcus had to have difficult conversations with employees about changing job responsibilities, and in 2 cases, letting people go whose work was no longer aligned with the company's new direction. But there were victories, too. The Belmont Street project became a local news story when the grocery store owner went public about Marcus's investment in the community. The nonprofit partnerships led to Marcus's company developing 2 affordable housing projects, which improved his public image dramatically. And at the community center, Marcus's volunteer hours had long since surpassed his court requirement, but he kept showing up every Tuesday and Thursday without fail. Fiona documented all of it, crafting press releases and managing media inquiries, and slowly, carefully rebuilding Marcus's reputation from notorious bad boy to reformed businessman, genuinely trying to make amends. The work was satisfying in ways her previous career had never been, because she could see real change happening, not just the illusion of it. 6 months after she'd first taken Marcus on as a client, Fiona wrote a comprehensive report for Gerald outlining everything they'd accomplished. Marcus's company had transitioned to a primarily community-focused development model. His public image had shifted from villain to cautious work in progress. Most importantly, the changes seemed genuine and sustainable. "I think we've achieved what we set out to do," Fiona told Gerald in his office. "Marcus doesn't need me managing his image anymore. He's doing the right things, and the reputation follows naturally from that." Gerald leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile on his face. "So you're saying your professional relationship with Marcus Ivory is complete?" "Yes," Fiona said, though the word felt heavier than it should, "and personally, that's none of your business." But she was smiling. Gerald laughed. I've worked with you for 6 months, Fiona. I've seen how you look at each other when you think no one's watching. Just be happy, okay? You both deserve it. That evening, Fiona went to the community center even though it wasn't one of Marcus's usual days. But he was there anyway, repainting the children's reading nook with a teenager named Devon, who was part of the center's youth employment program. "Hey," Marcus said when he noticed her, his face lighting up in a way that made her heart skip. "What are you doing here? I talked to Gerald today. Officially closed out your account." Marcus set down his paintbrush carefully. Yeah, you don't need a PR manager anymore. You're just a guy doing good work. The reputation takes care of itself from here. So we're not working together anymore. Not professionally." He glanced at Devon, who was very obviously pretending not to listen. "Can you give us a minute?" "Sure, boss," Devon said, grinning as he stepped out of the room. Marcus moved closer to Fiona, paint-stained hands shoved in his pockets. "I've been waiting 6 months to ask you this." "Ask me what?" "Have dinner with me. A real date, no business agenda, no professional boundaries. Just you and me figuring out if this thing between us is as real as it feels." Fiona had known this was coming, had been thinking about it for weeks, but hearing him actually say it made her nervous and excited and hopeful all at once. "The timing's better now," she said softly. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." Marcus's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. "Tomorrow night, I know a place quiet and low-key, actual good food instead of fancy nonsense." "Sounds perfect." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Fiona Bennett, you've turned my entire life upside down in the best possible way. You did the hard work yourself, but you made me want to do it. That's the difference." Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant in southeast Portland, the kind of neighborhood place with checked tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. Marcus wore jeans and a dark blue button-down, no tie, relaxed in a way Fiona had never seen him during their professional relationship. They talked for 3 hours, moving from topic to topic with the ease of people who already knew each other well but were discovering new dimensions. Marcus told her about his childhood in more detail, about watching his mother struggle and vowing to never be that vulnerable. Fiona shared stories about her own upbringing in Portland, her escape to New York, and her difficult decision to come home after her career there imploded. "I felt like a failure," she admitted over tiramisu they were sharing. "I'd built this big career, and then it just fell apart, and I had to come crawling back to my hometown." "Coming home isn't crawling," Marcus said. "Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do." "Is that what you did?" "Coming back to who you used to be before you became the bad boy real estate mogul. Maybe. Or maybe I'm becoming someone new entirely. Someone who learned from both versions of myself." He paused. "Someone who's better because you came into his life." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight. "You give me too much credit." "Not possible." They went on a second date and then a third. Marcus took her to the Saturday market downtown, where they ate food cart meals and browsed handmade crafts. Fiona dragged him to a used bookstore where they spent 2 hours debating novels and building teetering stacks of books they probably didn't need. They went hiking in Forest Park, where Marcus admitted he hadn't been on a real hike in over a decade, despite living in one of the most beautiful cities in the country. "I forgot how to enjoy things that didn't involve profit margins," he said as they reached a viewpoint overlooking the city. "Everything became about acquisition and success and building the empire." "And now?" Fiona asked, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. "Now I'm remembering that the point of success is supposed to be enjoying your life, not sacrificing it." He turned to look at her, his green eyes intense. "You're a big part of that remembering." She kissed him then, there on the hiking trail with Portland spread out below them. It was soft and sweet and felt like something clicking into place. As summer turned to fall, their relationship deepened. Marcus met Fiona's parents over Sunday dinner, charming her mother with questions about her garden, and winning over her initially skeptical father by genuinely engaging in a debate about city development policies. Fiona met Marcus's mother, Elena, a warm woman who owned 2 successful catering companies and who pulled Fiona aside to whisper, "Thank you for reminding my son who he really is." At the community center, they became a fixture together, the reformed millionaire and the woman who'd helped him transform. The kids loved seeing them together, and Fiona noticed that Marcus was more comfortable showing affection now, holding her hand as they read stories or stealing quick kisses when they thought no one was looking. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments when Marcus's old instincts would surface, when he'd start talking about a property deal in purely financial terms before catching himself. There were times when Fiona worried that she'd pushed him to change too much, that he resented the smaller profit margins and the complicated work of ethical development. They had arguments about it, sometimes heated, but they'd learned to talk through the tension rather than letting it fester. "I don't regret the changes," Marcus told her one night after a particularly difficult discussion about whether to take on a new investor who wanted faster returns. They were in his apartment, a renovated loft that had exposed brick walls and more space than one person needed. "But that doesn't mean it's not hard sometimes." "I know," Fiona said, curled against his side on the couch, "and I don't want you to think I expect perfection. You're allowed to struggle with this. But you won't let me slide back into old patterns." "No, I won't. Is that okay?" He pressed a kiss to her temple. "It's better than okay. It's exactly what I need." A year after they'd first met, Marcus made a decision that shocked even Fiona. He announced that he was donating a significant portion of his wealth to create a foundation focused on affordable housing and community development in Portland. The foundation would partner with nonprofits and community organizations to develop projects that kept neighborhoods intact while still allowing for growth and improvement. "It's $15 million, Marcus told her the night before the public announcement, his hands shaking slightly. "That's a third of my liquid assets." Fiona was speechless for a moment. "Marcus, that's incredible, but are you sure? That's a massive commitment." "I've never been more sure of anything. Well, except maybe you." He took her hands in his. "I can't undo the damage I did before. I can't give those families back the homes I took, but I can try to make sure fewer people go through what they went through, and I can use the resources I have to actually build something good." "You're amazing," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm trying to be the person you always seemed to think I could be." The foundation launch made headlines. Some press was skeptical, calling it a publicity stunt or a tax shelter. But others recognized it as genuine, pointing to the year of changes Marcus had already implemented in his business. The community response was overwhelmingly positive, with nonprofits and neighborhood associations reaching out about potential partnerships. At the launch event, held at the community center where Marcus's transformation had begun, he gave a speech that Fiona had helped him write, but that was entirely his own words. "A little over a year ago, I was forced to come to this community center as part of a court order," Marcus said, standing in front of a crowd of community members, press, and nonprofit leaders. "I was angry about it. I thought I was above this kind of work, that my time was too valuable to waste reading books to kids or helping with homework. But those kids, and the people who run this center, taught me something crucial. They taught me that every business decision I make affects real people with real lives." They reminded me that I was once one of those kids who needed places like this to survive. He paused, and Fiona, sitting in the front row, saw genuine emotion in his face. I can't change my past. I can't undo the harm I've caused. But I can change my future, and I can try to build something better. This foundation is a start. It's my commitment to developing this city in ways that honor the people who already live here, rather than displacing them in the name of profit. And it's my promise to stay accountable, to keep showing up, to keep learning. The applause was thunderous, and several people stood. Marcus's eyes found Fiona's in the crowd, and the look he gave her was pure gratitude and love. After the event, as they were walking to Marcus's car, he suddenly stopped. "Wait, I have to do something." "What?" Instead of answering, he got down on one knee right there on the sidewalk outside the community center. Fiona's heart stopped. "Marcus, what are you doing?" He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring with a single diamond. "I had this whole plan for how I was going to propose. Romantic dinner, maybe that viewpoint where we had our first kiss. But standing in there tonight, talking about the future, all I could think was that I want you in that future officially. Not as my PR manager or my girlfriend, but as my partner in everything." "Marcus," her voice broke. "Fiona Bennett, you saw something good in me when I couldn't see it in myself. You pushed me to be better, and then you loved me while I struggled to become that better version. You've made me believe that change is possible and that I'm worth the effort. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Fiona's face. People were stopping on the sidewalk, watching this scene unfold. She didn't care. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Marcus slipped the ring on her finger, and then he was standing, lifting her off the ground as he kissed her. Around them, strangers started clapping, and Fiona laughed against his mouth, joy flooding through her entire body. "I love you," Marcus said when he finally set her down. "I should have said that first. I love you so much. I love you too. Even when you're difficult and stubborn and backsliding into old patterns. Especially then," he said with a grin. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the community center, because it felt right to celebrate their union in the place where Marcus's transformation had truly begun. Alina cried through the entire ceremony, and Fiona's parents beamed with pride. The kids from the reading circle served as honorary ushers, excited to be part of Mr. Marcus and Miss Fiona's special day. Gerald officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Claire decorated the gymnasium with flowers donated by local businesses that had partnered with Marcus's foundation. Instead of expensive catering, they served food from Alina's company, which felt more meaningful than any fancy meal could have been. "I'm marrying a reformed bad boy millionaire," Fiona whispered to Marcus as they stood at the makeshift altar, waiting for the ceremony to begin. "Reformed being the key word," Marcus whispered back. "Though I'm keeping the millionaire part, someone has to fund the foundation." She laughed, and then the music started, and they were promising forever to each other in front of everyone who mattered. Their first year of marriage was an adjustment, learning to merge their lives fully rather than just dating. Marcus sold his downtown loft, and they bought a house together in Northeast Portland. A renovated craftsman with a big porch and enough space for the family they both wanted someday. Fiona continued working at Morrison and Associates, but she'd shifted her focus to working primarily with nonprofits and community organizations, using her skills to amplify good work rather than just managing damage control. Marcus's foundation grew, funding 5 major affordable housing projects in its first year and partnering with a dozen community organizations. His development company continued operating, but every project now went through rigorous community impact assessment. And Marcus had a reputation as a developer who actually listened to neighborhood concerns. At the community center, they still volunteered every week, reading to kids and helping with homework, and staying connected to the community that had catalyzed so much change. The kids they'd met that first year were getting older, and new faces kept arriving, each one another reminder of why the work mattered. 2 years into their marriage, Fiona told Marcus she was pregnant. They were in their kitchen on a Sunday morning, Marcus making his signature pancakes while Fiona pretended to help but mostly just stole bites of fruit from the cutting board. "I have news," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. Marcus looked up from the griddle. "Good news or bad news?" "Depends on your perspective. Good news, I think. Hope. Fiona, just tell me." She handed him the pregnancy test she'd taken that morning, watching his face as comprehension dawned. His expression went from confusion to shock to absolute joy in the space of 3 seconds. "Really?" His voice cracked slightly. "Really? We're having a baby." Marcus set down the spatula and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart pounding. "We're having a baby," he repeated like he needed to say it to believe it. "Are you happy?" She asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes suspiciously bright. "We're going to have a family." "A real family," Fiona agreed, thinking about Marcus's childhood, about her own desire for the kind of family that felt whole and safe. Their daughter was born in early spring, tiny and perfect with Marcus's green eyes and Fiona's dark hair. They named her Maya, after the little girl from the community center who'd first asked Marcus to tie her shoe, the child who'd been part of his initial transformation. Marcus was a devoted father from the first moment, getting up for night feedings and learning to change diapers with surprising competence, and talking to Maya in the same gentle voice he'd once used to read stories to community center kids. Watching him cradle their daughter, singing off-key lullabies at 2 in the morning, Fiona fell in love with him all over again. "I never thought I'd have this," Marcus admitted one night when Maya was 2 months old. They were both exhausted, sitting in the nursery while Maya finally slept after a particularly fussy evening. "A family, a real home, someone who loves me not for what I can provide but for who I am." "You deserve all of it," Fiona said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You've worked so hard to become this person." "We've worked hard," he corrected. "None of this happens without you, Fiona. You're the reason I'm this person. I'm the reason you started changing. You're the reason you kept changing. There's a difference." Maya made a small sound in her sleep, and they both smiled at the noise that had become the soundtrack of their lives. By the time Maya was 3, Marcus's reputation had been completely transformed. He was invited to speak at urban planning conferences about community-centered development. His foundation had funded 15 affordable housing projects and supported dozens of community organizations. The businesses he'd displaced years ago couldn't be brought back, but he'd done everything possible to make amends and prevent future harm. Sometimes people would recognize him and remember the old Marcus, the bad boy millionaire who'd been notorious for his ruthlessness. But more often now, they recognized him as the guy who'd helped save their community center, or funded the new affordable apartment building, or partnered with local organizations to create opportunities instead of destroying them. "You ever miss it?" Fiona asked him one evening. They were at the community center's annual fundraiser, watching Maya play with other kids while they helped set up for the event. The old life, the big profits, the simplicity of just caring about money. Marcus considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss how easy it was." not having to think about impact or community input or any of the complications. But then I look at what I have now, Maya, work that actually matters, respect instead of fear, and I can't imagine trading any of it for bigger profit margins. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because hard means it matters. They watched Maya laugh at something another child said, her joy infectious. She's never going to know the old you, Fiona observed. Good, I hope she never has to. I hope she grows up thinking that caring about community and people is just the normal way to do business. You're going to raise her to be better than both of us. Marcus pulled Fiona close, pressing a kiss to her temple. We're going to raise her to know that it's never too late to change, but it's always better to start right in the first place. When Maya was 5, Marcus and Fiona decided to have another child. Their son, Daniel, was born with Marcus's dark hair and Fiona's smile, completing their family in a way that felt almost magical. Maya was an enthusiastic big sister, constantly wanting to help with the baby and telling Daniel stories in the same animated way she'd watched her father read to kids at the community center. The community center had become like a second home for their family. Maya attended programs there, and Marcus had joined the board of directors, using his business expertise to help with strategic planning and fundraising. The center had expanded twice since Marcus had first arrived for his court-ordered service, now serving 3 times as many families as it had back then. You know what's wild? Marcus said to Fiona one Tuesday evening. They were at the center, Maya helping with the reading circle while Fiona held Daniel. If I hadn't thrown that drink at that reporter, if the judge hadn't sentenced me to community service, none of this would exist. Not us, not the foundation, not this version of my life. Butterfly effect, Fiona said. One bad decision leading to a moment of forced reflection, leading to complete transformation. Makes you think about how many other people could change if they were just pushed to see their lives differently. Is that a future project I hear in your voice? Marcus grinned at her. Maybe. What would you think about expanding the foundation's work to include programs that help other business leaders engage with community service? Not as punishment, but as education. Help them understand impact before they cause harm instead of after. I think that sounds exactly like something you'd come up with, and I think it's brilliant. They launched the program a year later, calling it the Community Impact Initiative. It paired business leaders with nonprofit organizations for structured volunteer experiences, combined with education about equitable development and community engagement. The response was better than they'd hoped, with 20 business leaders participating in the first cohort. Marcus was in his element, mentoring these leaders with the understanding of someone who'd been exactly where they were. He didn't preach or judge. He just shared his own story and encouraged them to examine their own impacts and choices. Some of the participants were skeptical at first, but by the end of the 6-month program, several had made significant changes to their business practices. You've become the person you needed when you were starting out, Fiona told him after one particularly successful program graduation. I had you, Marcus said. That made all the difference. And now they have you. We're paying it forward, he said simply. It's the least we can do. Their 10th wedding anniversary fell on a Tuesday, which meant they were at the community center as usual. But after the kids had been picked up and the building had grown quiet, Fiona found that Marcus had arranged a surprise. The gymnasium had been decorated with fairy lights and candles. A small table set up in the center, with takeout from the Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date. How did you do all this? Fiona asked, delighted as Marcus pulled out a chair for her. I had help. Claire is a romantic at heart. He sat across from her, reaching for her hand. 10 years ago, you walked into my life and refused to let me stay the person I was. You pushed and challenged and believed in me even when I didn't deserve it. You always deserved it, Fiona interrupted. Maybe, or maybe you just made me worthy of that belief. He squeezed her hand. I wanted to celebrate our anniversary here because this is where everything changed. This is where I met those kids who reminded me of myself. This is where you spied on me and decided I might be worth saving. I never saw it as saving, just revealing. Whatever we call it, you changed my life. And I want to spend the rest of our lives continuing to change together, continuing to grow, continuing to build something good. Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. You're getting sentimental in your old age. I'm 32, Marcus protested with a laugh. Wait, no, I'm 42 now. When did that happen? Time moves fast when you're actually living instead of just acquiring. They ate dinner by candlelight in the community center gymnasium, talking about their kids and their work and their dreams for the future. Maya wanted to be a teacher when she grew up, inspired by watching her parents volunteer. Daniel was only 3 but already showed signs of being intensely curious about how things worked. The foundation was planning its most ambitious project yet, a mixed-use development that would include affordable housing, community spaces, and locally owned businesses. You ever think about what would have happened if we'd met differently? Fiona asked. If you hadn't been court-ordered to volunteer, if I hadn't been assigned to observe you. Sometimes, Marcus admitted, but I don't think we would have worked any other way. I needed to be brought low enough to actually see myself clearly. And you needed a project complicated enough to make you remember why you got into this work in the first place. We were both a little broken. And we fixed each other, or at least helped each other fix ourselves. After dinner, they slow danced in the gymnasium to music playing from Marcus's phone, swaying together in the space where he'd once read to children while serving his sentence, where they'd shelved books and had tentative conversations, where their connection had first sparked. I love you, Fiona whispered against his chest. I love who you were, who you are, and who you're becoming. I love you too, always and completely. Over the next several years, their lives continued to evolve. Maya grew into a thoughtful teenager who volunteered at the community center, just as her parents did, carrying on the family tradition. Daniel developed a passion for architecture, inspired by visiting his father's development projects and seeing how buildings could be designed to serve communities. Marcus's hair started showing gray at the temples, and Fiona joked that he was aging into a distinguished elder statesman of ethical development. The foundation celebrated its 15th anniversary, with an event showcasing the more than 50 affordable housing projects it had funded and the hundreds of families who'd been helped. Former residents spoke about what stable, affordable housing had meant for their lives. Nonprofit partners shared stories of community transformation, and Marcus, standing at the podium with Fiona by his side, reflected on the journey. 15 years ago, I was a different person, he said to the crowd. I was successful by conventional measures, but I was empty. I'd built an empire on other people's displacement, convinced myself that business was just business, that profit justified any cost. And then, a judge forced me to spend time in a community center, and a woman named Fiona Bennett refused to let me hide from what I'd become. He turned to smile at Fiona, who stood just off stage with Maya and Daniel. Change is possible, but it's not easy. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself. It requires sacrificing short-term gain for long-term good. It requires surrounding yourself with people who will challenge you and support you and refuse to let you settle for less than your best self. I've been incredibly fortunate to have all of that. The foundation had become self-sustaining, with an endowment that would allow it to continue its work long after Marcus and Fiona were gone. Marcus's development company had inspired other developers to adopt similar community-focused practices, slowly shifting the culture of real estate development in Portland. It wasn't a revolution, but it was meaningful change, the kind that accumulated over time into transformed systems and protected communities. On a quiet evening when Maya was 17 and Daniel was 15, the family sat together in their living room. Maya was studying for college entrance exams. Daniel was sketching building designs in his notebook, and Marcus and Fiona were curled up on the couch reading. "Dad," Maya said, looking up from her practice test. "I'm writing an essay about someone who influenced me, and I wanted to ask you something." "Shoot," Marcus said, setting down his book. "You think you're a good person?" The question hung in the air. Fiona looked at her husband, curious how he'd answer. Marcus considered it carefully. "I think I'm a person who did bad things and then chose to do better. I don't know if that makes me good or just less bad than I was. But I know I try every day to make choices I can be proud of, choices that honor the people who helped me change." "That's good," Maya said, writing something down. "That's really good, actually." "What made you ask?" Fiona questioned. "My teacher said that real character isn't about never making mistakes. It's about what you do after you make them. And I thought about how everyone knows Dad's history, how he used to be this notorious guy, but then he changed. That seems like real character to me." Marcus looked at his daughter with unconcealed emotion. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know." Daniel looked up from his sketchbook. "Can I ask something too?" "Of course. You wish you'd started doing the good stuff earlier." "Like, do you regret the time you spent being the bad guy?" Another thoughtful pause. "I regret the people I hurt, absolutely. I wish I could go back and make different choices that wouldn't have displaced families or destroyed communities. But I can't. So instead, I try to make sure the rest of my life counts for something better. And honestly, I don't know if I would have appreciated doing the good work if I hadn't first understood what doing the bad work felt like." "That's deep, Dad," Daniel said with a grin. "I have my moments." Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Marcus and Fiona stood in their kitchen sharing a glass of wine. "Good kids," Marcus observed. "We did all right," Fiona agreed. "Better than all right. They're thoughtful and kind and engaged with the world, that's both of us. You teach them by example every day what it means to care about community and to keep trying to be better." Marcus pulled her close, and she relaxed into his embrace. They'd been married for 17 years, together for 18, and the comfort between them was as deep as the passion they'd started with. "I was thinking," Marcus said softly, "maybe it's time to write a book. Document the whole journey from notorious developer to community-focused work. Not as a vanity project, but as a genuine guide for other business leaders who want to change but don't know how. I think that's a wonderful idea, and I think you're the perfect person to write it. We'd write it together. Your perspective is crucial." "Our story," Fiona mused. "The PR specialist who saw potential in a bad boy millionaire. The bad boy millionaire who became her forever," Marcus added, referencing their journey in a way that made Fiona smile. They spent the next 2 years working on the book, writing early in the mornings before work and on weekends when the kids were occupied. They interviewed people who'd been part of the journey, documented the foundation's impact, and shared the honest, sometimes unflattering details of Marcus's transformation. It wasn't a fairy tale or a simple redemption story. It was complicated and messy and real, which made it powerful. The book was published to positive reviews, becoming a resource for business schools and nonprofit organizations. Marcus and Fiona did a modest book tour, speaking at conferences and universities about ethical business practices and the possibility of genuine change. They always emphasized that Marcus's story wasn't exceptional because he was special, but because anyone could make similar choices if they were willing to do the hard work. Maya went to college studying education, planning to become a teacher in underserved communities. Daniel followed his architecture passion, specifically interested in designing affordable housing that was both functional and beautiful. Marcus and Fiona watched their children pursue paths aligned with the values they'd worked so hard to embody, and they felt proud in ways that had nothing to do with traditional success. When Marcus turned 55, the city of Portland honored him with an award for community development. At the ceremony, the mayor spoke about how Marcus's transformation and subsequent work had influenced an entire generation of developers and business leaders. Former residents of his foundation funded housing developments, shared testimonials. Claire from the community center presented him with a scrapbook filled with photos and notes from all the kids he'd read to over the years. "This is overwhelming," Marcus admitted in his acceptance speech. "I don't feel like I deserve accolades for stopping bad behavior and starting good behavior." That should just be the baseline. The audience laughed, but he continued, "If this award is for anything, it should be for the power of community to transform individuals and the power of individuals to transform systems. I'm one person who changed because I was forced to see beyond my own narrow interests. Imagine what could happen if we built systems that encouraged that kind of sight from the beginning, that valued community impact as much as profit margins." Fiona watched her husband from the audience, tears in her eyes. The man on stage was so different from the one she'd first observed on that security monitor 18 years ago. And yet, in some ways, he was exactly who he'd always had the potential to be. She just helped him find his way back to himself. After the ceremony, they walked through downtown Portland, hand in hand, looking at buildings and businesses and neighborhoods. Some bore the subtle mark of Marcus's old work, properties he'd flipped in his previous life. But many more showed the influence of his new work: affordable housing developments with community spaces, mixed-use buildings that served neighborhoods instead of displacing them, partnerships between developers and community organizations that created shared value. "We've been doing this for almost 2 decades, Marcus said, and I feel like we're just getting started." "There's always more work to do," Fiona agreed. "More communities to support, more businesses to influence, more change to make. You up for another 20 years? She squeezed his hand. "With you, I'm up for forever." They continued walking, two people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment, who challenged and supported and loved each other through genuine transformation. Behind them was the story of a reformed millionaire and the woman who'd helped him change. Ahead of them was a future they'd keep building together, one good choice at a time. The bad boy had become her forever, and she had become his. And the love they'd built was grounded in something deeper than romance or passion, though it had plenty of both. It was grounded in mutual growth, in shared values, in the daily choice to keep trying to be better together than they could ever be apart. As they reached their car, Maya texted a photo of her first classroom where she'd just started her teaching career. Daniel sent a sketch of an affordable housing design he was working on for a class project. Their children were carrying forward the work in their own ways, creating ripples of positive change that would extend far beyond Marcus and Fiona's lifetimes. "We did good," Marcus said softly, looking at the photos on his phone. "We're still doing good," Fiona corrected. "And we always will be." They drove home through the city they'd helped transform, through neighborhoods they'd protected and communities they'd supported. And when they arrived at their house, the craftsman they'd bought all those years ago, they walked inside knowing that this was exactly where they belonged, exactly who they were meant to be, exactly the life they were meant to build together. The story of the reformed millionaire and his forever love wasn't finished, not really. It would continue in every project they supported, every person they influenced, every community they helped protect. But this chapter, the one that started with Fiona watching a bad boy read to children and ended with two people who'd found love and purpose in transforming together, this chapter was complete, and it was beautiful.